Hey friends, welcome back to another video lecture. Today we're looking at standard 16, so we're still on domain 4, but looking at standard 16 now. There's our standards in case you want to read over those. But today's going to be really fun because we get to talk about the Roaring Twenties, which is a super interesting topic. So this is after World War One. World War One ends in 1918, so we're talking about the 1920s and kind of the way that the U.S. is going to form this like new national identity after that. So the first thing that we look at is the Red Scare. So you've got Karl Marx, which you've probably heard that name before. He comes up with this idea of communism, which you've probably heard of before, that basically is just this idea that the workers are going to overthrow the capitalists. So the factory workers are going to rise up and overthrow the big industrial leaders like the Rockefellers and the Carnegie type people. And we're going to get rid of social classes, and everybody's going to be on the same page, and everybody's going to be equal, which sounds really good on paper, but doesn't really work in real life. So in Russia, you've got the Bolsheviks, which is a pretty great word, Bolshevik. But anyway, so the Bolsheviks, their leader Lenin, they start this revolution in Russia where they are spreading communism and they are trying to basically wipe out all the capitalism in the world, and they want communism to be the way that the whole world works. And so Americans are afraid of this because communism and capitalism are so different. They're just like inherently enemies, kind of. So Americans are afraid that communism is going to put our way of life in danger. So this is going to lead to a time period that we call the Red Scare. We call it the Red Scare because the communist flag, and go back to this slide, is mostly red. You can see this, the communist flag in this picture here. So the Red Scare is this time period where you've got this fear of communists and this fear of communism. And it's going to lead to a bunch of different things. So one is this like pursuit of suspected communists. And this is just the first Red Scare. We're going to see a whole nother one later. But it gets to the point where people are like turning in their neighbors because they think they're communist. And like you can see this poster here, we get a lot of propaganda against communism. So the Red Menace is real, report all suspected communists. And it's also going to lead to immigrant restrictions. So basically, we don't want any communists coming into our country and influencing the way we do things. So we put up a quota system, which basically says we're only going to let a certain number of people come in from certain countries. So you can see this political cartoon here shows that. It's kind of hard to see, but this is a big funnel. And you've got people from Europe trying to get into the US. And Uncle Sam here is kind of putting a gate on this funnel so that only a certain number of people can get in. And that's what we did. We basically said, we're only letting this number of people from this country or this country come in. And so it's that restriction on immigration, all because of communism, because we were afraid of communism. And so the next thing we look at are the 18th and 19th Amendments. So these come as a result of World War I, even though it may not seem like it at first. But the 18th Amendment, if you remember from government, which you should, it prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. So here's what this has to do with World War I. In World War I, who did we fight against? Mostly the Germans. Who makes a lot of beer? Also Germans. So it became patriotic to not drink. And remember, we had these temperance movements before, so we've already had this idea kind of come around of getting rid of alcohol, right? Well, after World War I, it becomes patriotic not to drink. Plus, people thought we can use the wheat for feeding the soldiers. So some people thought it was like wasteful to make beer or whatever. So we get the 18th Amendment, which makes alcohol completely illegal. You can't make it, you can't sell it, you can't transport it, you can't drink it. You cannot have alcohol. It was completely illegal, which is going to lead to all this fun stuff like speakeasies. So a speakeasy is like a secret club where you go to drink. You like have a password to get in like the back door of the speakeasy. You're going to see a rise of organized crime like gangsters, Al Capone, the mob bosses. That's all in this time period. You're going to see bootleggers for the first time. So a bootlegger, the reason why they called them that is because they would actually take bottles of alcohol and stick them in the legs of their boots in order to transport the alcohol. This is when NASCAR starts, actually, because you've got the bootleggers and they're trying to transport the alcohol. And so they're racing their cars to see which car is the fastest and can get away from the cops. This is when we see moonshiners start, because you've got people who are going to make their own alcohol in the backwoods by the light of the moon. And so those are our moonshiners. So you got all of that stuff comes as a result of the 18th Amendment. And that's a really big part of the 1920s and kind of how the culture changed back then. And then we also talk about the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote. So again, this kind of has to do with World War I. Actually, it has a lot to do with World War I. So during World War I, we have the women start to work in the factories. Again, remember we talked about how they're going to kind of start to go to work for the first time to help the war effort. So the 19th Amendment was basically passed as a reward for them working during World War I. So women are going to start to find this like newfound independence. So with the vote, they're going to get the right to vote, and it's going to kind of change the culture and the role of women. So we're going to start to see this new type of woman, the flapper, come out. And so you can see in this picture here, this is a really good example of what we would call flappers. And so they're going to be wearing shorter dresses that show their knees, which is so scandalous. And they're going to have shorter hair and more makeup, and they're going to date casually and go out and drink and party. And so they have this like new independence. And so the entire role of women is going to start to change in the 1920s. So I'm going to take a pause there. That's going to be the end of our first part, and part 2 is coming up. Stay tuned.